Numbers chapter 9 to 13 today, and departure from the last one. We don't have any counting at all in this little bit, but we do start with the Israelites doing as they're told, and everything seems pretty groovy. God says to Moses, get the Israelites to celebrate Passover on this specific day, and everyone does it, and it seems pretty good. There's a question mark over what you do if you can't do it on that day because you're ceremonially unclean. That's quite a hard word to say. And that's all resolved nicely, and everything seems quite fine. Shortly afterwards, of course, everything goes a little bit wrong in that the Israelites start to get very, very grumpy, specifically whinging about the manna from heaven, which I hadn't quite realised was still going on. Just to remind, that's the stuff where the dew in the morning forms like this coriander seed-like stuff, the manna, which is then ground up and then can be turned into bread. And it turns out the Israelites are getting very bored of this, and they're thinking back to how good it was in Egypt, when they could have fish and meat and all sorts of other things. So they're basically whinging and whining at Moses, saying, we want meat and all the rest of it. It's an interesting one that they're complaining about the manna from heaven. In my head, the expression manna from heaven meant something was fantastic, and it comes like, oh, it's like manna from heaven. But it turns out it's just a weird seed that comes in the morning, you have to grind up and make bread out of it. And I guess it saved the day in terms of they were in the desert and there was no food. But clearly they're getting very, very bored of it. So I think the expression is probably not very well used in modern times anyway. But anyway, moving on. Moses doesn't like all the whinging that's happening at him, and he goes to God and he starts complaining at God, saying, so this is like the worst job ever. I have to put up with all this crap from the Israelites. I'm kind of fed up with it. And actually, if this is as good as it gets, I'd rather just die. So she says that. So it's clearly the job is weighing on him, but to be fair, that's probably one of the worst jobs in history, I suppose, in terms of managing a big group of people. And it starts off by God saying, all right, fine, I'll give them meat, which I raised an eyebrow to as I was reading along. I was thinking, all you got to do is whinge and God gives you whatever you want. I know someone who would be delighted if that was true. But then God goes on to say, if they want meat, I'll give them meat. And that's sort of, okay, this is an undertone here. And then until they have so much meat, they're sick of it, and it comes out of their nostrils. It's a nice image. In the middle of this, say Moses is complaining that he's just so sick of this job and all the rest of it. So God says, go and get 70 of the Israelite elders and bring them to God. And then God appears as a cloud to them, it says in this time. So it's not like we find out what God looks like or anything. And it says God then takes some of the spirit off of Moses, spirit with a capital S, not Holy Spirit. I think my understanding is that comes later on in the New Testament. But it is interesting because I assume it wasn't invented in the New Testament. So maybe it's something along those lines. And some of it is put on each of these 70 elders, basically to spread the load for Moses. So not clear what impact that has initially, but I assume that will be significant going forward. And then it says that God blows a wind in from the east and it brings in quail and they pile up everywhere, and that's the meat they get. It does mention that they blow in from the sea. I had to Google this, but quail don't live anywhere near the sea. I'm not sure what a quail looks like. I do now. But yeah, they live in grass and mostly stand around on the ground. So I'm not sure why they're blowing in from the sea, but probably not significant. Just useful extra bits you can learn about where quails live. It also says as part of this, along come the quail, and God is so fed up with the Israelites whinging and all the rest of it that not only does he make them sick of it, he also throws a plague at them just for good measure. It's noted in this bit, actually it's kind of an acknowledgement, I suppose, that Moses is having a hard time. It's acknowledged that he's supposedly the most humble man on earth. But it turns out in the theme of grumbling that Aaron and his wife Miriam don't like Moses, or rather don't like that Moses is getting all the glory in all this. It's difficult to describe it as glory, wouldn't it? But all the recognition, perhaps. And they don't like his wife either. There's not much said about that, but they don't seem to like who his wife is. Not quite clear on that, but maybe that will become relevant later. And God anyway summons Aaron, Moses and Miriam to come and sit down and have a chat. And God tells us a little bit why he's chosen Moses, which I thought was really interesting. God talks about when he's dealing with prophets, he appears as visions and dreams, which that's very interesting. That's such an unreliable way to communicate, isn't it? Because you're going to wake up and go, was that a dream? Was it not? And I suppose if you remember it for more than 2 hours, it's perhaps not a dream, but I don't know. I guess I have had dreams that I can remember. But anyway, it singles out that Moses is special, and that's God saying that's why he speaks to him face to face. I'm not sure if that actually means face to face, because I think we've established earlier that you can't see God's face, and doesn't talk to him in riddles, basically. That's all that's said on that, so it's not a massive part, but at the same time it's very interesting that God talked about he will reveal himself in ways to a lot of prophets as visions and dreams, which I think was how it worked for Noah, wasn't it? I can't remember. I think the others seem to be more literal, but I think Noah's came as a dream. And then for good measure, he gives Miriam a little skin disease, and she has to be banished for 7 days because, well, for grumbling, I guess. So God does not like grumbling, even though apparently if you grumble you might get some quail, but you might get a plague as well. So just be careful on whinging, apparently. We then move on, and God commands Moses to send some people into Canaan as a sort of a scouting mission. So they're obviously quite far north and have got closer to it, presumably, because it doesn't say they're away for ages. The scouting party goes up into Canaan, has a look about, comes back to Moses and reports that it is the land of milk and honey, which evidently is a good thing. I assume milk being farming, cattle, all the rest of it, honey being fertile for plants and all that sort of thing, I think. But also reports that the place is heavily fortified and the cities are powerful and all the rest of it. But then interestingly, they don't seem... There's a chap called Caleb who seems to be a decent one, but the rest of the people who went as this scouting party come back and apparently start spreading the word amongst the other Israelites that it's rubbish there, you don't want to go there and all the rest of it, which I think is going to be significant in the next section. But that is it for numbers 9 to 13. It's nice to have some story to get stuck into. A little bit bitty again, I suppose, but nothing obviously massive in terms of what we're dealing with there, I don't think. I'm always conscious of saying that. But yeah, so we'll move on to the next part and see where the story takes us in the next video.